is a report from uptown, from Harlem. Up here, above 110th Street, you enter a very special neighborhood. To the east is the Harlem River and the Puerto Rican. To the west is the Hudson. And on all sides is the color line. And that is what sets Harlem off most from the rest of New York. But Harlem is a part of New York, and when Harlem is troubled, as it has been lately, those troubles may be civic as well as racial. And we are here simply to find out what troubles Harlem now.
It's easy to collect a crowd in Harlem. You never have to go looking for people. There are at least 400,000 in this neighborhood, jammed into a few square miles of tenements, housing projects, brownstone blocks. A city within a city. It has its own local landmarks, its own business sections, its own special atmosphere. Even during working hours, they spill out onto the stoops and sidewalks. With time on their hands, Harlem's working people are caught in the summer doldrums, last summer's doldrums. For up here, they are still waiting for the recession to end. And every evening around this corner, they wait for Lady Luck to come their way. This is the numbers block, where the crowd turns out even in the rain to get the word on the night number, the second payoff of the day, at odds of 600 to 1, on a dollar, a quarter, or even a dime. For the numbers are the uptown version of the racetrack. And just a couple of blocks away at another corner, you can see the junkies taking up their vigil, waiting to buy the fix. Up here, you sometimes have to overlook vice and concentrate on violence. At a local youth club, CBS News correspondent Tom Costigan talked to a couple of young men who contributed to violence in Harlem. Two former members of a street gang, now gone straight.
Well, for fellows who haven't been taken in hand, who haven't been supervised now, what do they do at night? What do they do in the daytime when they're not working, not going to school? What's it like on your block?
Well, the only thing there is to do is stick around the block, hang on the corners. If you can get enough money together, buy beers or something, anything for excitement, just to break the monotony.
You had some fights too, didn't you?
Oh, naturally, yes.
What were they about, do you remember?
Well, they never had any real reason for just a simple misunderstanding, over-exaggerated, you know.
But at that time, you thought it was worth fighting about, huh?
Yeah, at that time, yes.
Did many of the fellows in the gang, were they armed? Were you armed?
At times, yes.
Mm-hmm.
In this incident, adults were armed. No gang fight, just a street corner argument. But it had an edge to it. Knives were flashed. The police stepped in, and a crowd gathered. It was an incident just as routine as this that blew up into last month's near riot. Up here, trouble is routine. Every week, in just one small precinct, less than a square mile, there are 17 cases of assault, 24 thefts. On the average of almost once a week, a homicide or manslaughter. Not an astonishingly high rate, perhaps, when you consider the population of these few blocks, 122,000 people rubbing against each other. The police are probably no tougher on Harlem than they are on any other neighborhood. And Harlem is not so much anti-police as just terribly police conscious, partly because there are so many cops around. And 6 out of 7 of the police up here are white. Per city block, Harlem seems jammed with police. Per 1,000 population, it has just about the same number as New York in general. But Harlem, they tell you up here, is the only neighborhood in the city that's run by the police instead of by political officials. Anywhere else, they say, if you want something, you go to your district leader. Uptown, if you want something, you have to go to the cops. There are no political leaders, they say, with real influence in the city. A retired policeman with some observations on his old beat and the policeman's role in it. Correspondent Costigan put the questions to George Weber, a former detective who worked this neighborhood as well as others. He's now a Harlem businessman.
Well, Mr. Weber, there has been question raised occasionally about the sending of additional reinforcements into Harlem, police reinforcements, and that has caused in return some apparent tension. What is your thinking on that?
Well, I'm not an authority on strategy as far as
just as your own personal.
But I think the more a policeman to send up here, the greater attention we'll get.
Mm-hmm. And is there a great...
I think it's only be a matter of routine.
Mm-hmm.
Should be just a matter of routine police work. I say this much, though. They need more seasoned policemen up here. Men that knows the job and men that have previous dealings with colored people and who are interested in the community. Now, another thing that I say that they should have here is more qualified Negroes in executive positions.
You mean in business?
No, in police departments. That's right. Like the desk officers and things. So when the people have an occasion to go into these precincts, they see some representative of their own race.
Did you yourself feel any differently when you were assigned to Harlem and then assigned to other sections of the city, white sections of the city?
I didn't. As I said before, if you know your job, you can work anywhere. That's the reason why I suggest that as far as the police are concerned, I think the question of bringing Negro policemen back into Harlem is wrong, because I think they're doing a better job now in race relations by being distributed all over the city of New York. But I say that the men that are sent here, they should be screened. They should be experienced men that knows their jobs, and in case of an emergency, they know just what to do instead of waiting around till someone with experience appear on the scene.
There are different, let's say, psychological problems to be handled in Harlem?
Well,
I mean, among the people, knowing the people?
Well, in the first place, a policeman appear on the scene. If he is experienced, he can handle the situation right away. He knows just what to do. Whereas a young fellow comes out, he walks up to a crowd, he's nervous, he's bewildered, he don't know just what to do. First place, he don't know who to turn to. If there is any such thing as getting information to what actually happened, he's lost.
What would you say causes this nervousness on the part of young or immature patrolmen in Harlem as opposed to other sections of the city?
The old saying that everybody's afraid to come to Harlem.
Uh-huh.
And for what reason, I don't know. I say this much. Any people have been coming to Harlem for years and mind their own business, just like any other section. If you go any other part of the city and try to mind somebody else's business, you get in trouble. The same thing happened here. person can come to Harlem every day and every night of the week, take care of his own business, mind his own business. Nothing happens to him.
Nothing may happen to the visitor, but for the resident, there's always plenty of action. This is another way to collect a crowd. Just rattle a pair of dice. Even on a drizzly Saturday morning like this, you can always get up a game. The name of this game is stickball, of course. The street curbs shape the ballpark and the ground rules. You never have any trouble filling the bleachers. The problem is to keep the spectators and the delivery trucks off the playing field. The outfielder's name, JJ. He lives 5 walk-up flights above his outfield. Sometimes it seems no matter how hard you run, you're always coming up against a brick wall. So you run in any direction that promises escape, even for just a few moments. The street gangs have left their mark on this block, this territory, as even the little kids call it. The gang itself doesn't operate here anymore. Street workers from the City Youth Board and the Police Athletic League have been moving into the territory. And they've made some headway. Entertainment is where you find it. And uptown, you most often find it in the streets. The crowded streets. Gradually, the uptown landscape is changing. Some tenements giving way before the bulldozers. 36,000 people in Harlem now live in housing projects like these. But still, that's less than 1 out of 10. And new housing doesn't solve all of Harlem's problems. A new house in Harlem is still surrounded by the atmosphere of the ghetto. For 9/10 of the neighborhood, home is more like this. Or like this. somebody lives here. His name is Cootie. Cootie has 4 brothers and sisters. They'll show you the scars where the rats have bitten them. Your first terrifying impression when you come in here is fire trap. And it is, or was. Just a few days ago, a day or two after these pictures were made, the place went up in flames like a haystack. And Cootie and his brothers and sisters escaped the slum on the shoulders of the city firemen. Escaped this slum and went to live in another one. Not all of Harlem is slum or former slum. There are fine old apartments up on Sugar Hill, the Park Avenue of this neighborhood. And way over west, there are fine new apartments. Places where life has the glossy texture of a Sutton place. Once, most of Harlem looked like this. Strivers' Row, goal of the ambitious middle class. But they feel threatened, for the slum blight is spreading. This is Harold Jackman, tenant in one of the newer apartments. He told correspondent Costigan how the neighborhood has changed since he came here as a boy from England.
Well, when I came here, most Negroes lived downtown, and we moved actually from the San Juan Hill District on 62nd Street to Harlem in some years later. Well, Harlem at that time was about 10 blocks, that is Negro Harlem. It was more or less a compact area, and it wasn't, although at that time we were restricted, one didn't have quite the hemmed-in feeling that one has today, that the majority of people have today. Well, after World War I, or during World War I, there was an influx of Negroes from the West Indies and the South in the same area, and houses opened gradually, but even so, there weren't enough houses to accommodate the people. And the landlords were simply interested in getting their rents and not doing much about keeping the houses up.
Well, it's spread out quite a bit since that time, of course, but is it still a ghetto?
Well, to a great degree it's still a ghetto. In spite of city housing and public housing, the city is still not meeting the needs of the people. It's still a ghetto in the respect that, although it's quite true there's a law that Negroes can live any place they want, that law, I don't know whether it isn't enforced or not, but actually it's not so. Well, in all of New York, of course, there's a housing situation, and we feel that more keenly because the Negro, for the most part, is on the lowest economic rung of the ladder.
Among certain groups in recent months and recent years, there has been a Buy Black campaign indicating a Buy Negro movement. Is this a feeling among all Negroes?
I wouldn't say that, no. I think that buying black is... when you say buy black, actually, what do you mean?
Well, that's what they've been using on the street corners, buy black, which means buy Negro.
Well, I think that I would interpret that as to Negroes will go places where they know that
sales clerks are Negroes, where they are buying products from Negro salesmen. But I wouldn't call that buying black. We resent very much if they are Negroes who are selling products. If these products are sold in Negro neighborhoods, and if the white merchants don't patronize the Negro salesmen, we resent that greatly. I suppose you know about this, the liquor deal that's on now, the liquor salesmen protest.
Yes.
The fact that enough of them are not getting orders from the liquor dealers in Harlem.
Well, Mr. Jackman, the criticism has been raised that this, in effect, is the same kind of discrimination that the Negroes were fighting in the past, to discriminate against the whites in favor of Negroes. What is your reaction to that, sir?
Oh, I don't think it's quite the same thing. We just want our part. We want a certain part in this thing. It isn't the same thing. I mean, it seems to me that discrimination against blacks is a 100% thing. No, I don't see it that way at all.
What about politically? There have been campaigns which have been put forth in the past, political campaigns in New York City, which have appealed, in Harlem, let's say, and other sections that are predominantly Negro, have appealed to a Negro voter to vote as a bloc.
Yes, that's true, and I'm all in favor of that, because heretofore the whites have been playing one Negro against the other, and Negroes have realized that if we, years ago, we felt if we backed one Negro, no matter what his political affiliations, if we got him in, we will be making some headway. Of course, times have changed, and the major parties have realized that this is the political thing is something to reckon with, and all the major parties have placed Negro candidates on their tickets, but we still feel that enough hasn't been done. We have not been given our fair share in political plums, etc. I think in time to come, if Negroes are represented on all levels of government, then we'll get out of that so-called thinking in terms just of Negro business, and we will have what we are hoping, striving for, integration, because it will, if these Negroes are placed in certain positions and prove themselves, then I think that everybody will cease to think, well, of course this is very ideal, cease to think in terms of race.
We have not yet achieved freedom from our slave master. If Africa is free, what you and I should do is study the method by which she attained freedom, reached freedom, got her freedom. What method did she...
This man preaches in terms of race and against integration. The white man is the enemy. This is Malcolm X, leader in Harlem of a cult that calls themselves Muslims or Muslims. They are a leading force behind the campaigns to buy black. Part of the doctrine of their national leader, a man called Elijah Muhammad. Outsiders call it black supremacy. Malcolm X calls it black heritage or Negro nationalism. It appeals for Negro unity, and it looks to Africa for inspiration.
He says African. The Egyptians are African. The Honorable, my brother who stood here from Egypt is an African. 2 Africans are back there in the corner. You've got all kinds of shades of Africans, just like you have all shades of us here. Everywhere this white man has gone, he has left his mark. So we're going to... President Nasser in Egypt, of the United Arab Republic, is just as much an African as an African in the Belgian Congo. And if you don't think so, one of the men in the East that the white imperialist, as you call, or the white European, as you call, or the white American, as you call, the devil, who we call, The greatest, one of his worst enemies and most feared opponent in the East today is President Jamal Nasser. The man in America whom the slave master fears but respects more so than any black man in the West is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Elijah Muhammad, born Elijah Poole in Alabama, calls himself the Messenger. His Harlem branch, or temple, is in this unimposing building. In other cities, the cult has its own stores and schools. Here, it has only a restaurant. The Temple No. 7 Luncheonette, which doubles as operational headquarters. Periodically, the faithful are summoned to rallies. In between, every evening, there are street corner harangues. For the latest rally, at least 5,000 turned out. The messenger, who works out of Chicago, failed to show up. But the hardcore of his disciples, the trained bodyguards, stood on duty for hours. Neat, orderly. Courtesy, they say, is part of their creed. Just how many converts they've made in Harlem, this is hard to say. Perhaps 1,000, possibly 5 or 10,000. By many people in Harlem, their influence is discounted. By others, it is deplored. But the message is being circulated. A strong tonic being offered as a cure for Harlem's troubles. The troubles we've already examined, and some others which we'll look into in just a moment, when we resume with Part 2 of Harlem, a Self-Portrait. Harlem after dark. The bright lights and the strong beat used to bring white tourists uptown. But in recent years, the color line has sharpened. And Harlem at night is an almost all-Negro town. In the local night spots, you seldom see a white face anymore. Night and day, Harlem life is chronicled by Langston Hughes. Most of these books carry his byline. He's a poet, folklorist, humorist, and jazz lover. Some of his printed lyrics are being read to jazz in the downtown night spots. As a longtime observer of the local scene, Hughes was asked if there was anything special about Harlem's problems.
I would say that there are some problems that are different. The very fact that Harlem is 90% a Negro area brings problems that other parts of the city may not have. The fact that a large portion of our population is from the South, and many of them in recent years, particularly since the war. And sometimes the old problems of the South come up here with the newly arrived people. They bring along some of the deep resentments that have come out of a lifetime of segregation and Jim Crowism, you know. And almost everybody in Harlem, I suppose, like almost everybody in New York, is really from somewhere else originally, you know. I'm from Missouri a long time ago, in the Middle West. But having lived here a very long time, I feel, of course, now that I'm a Harlemite. And I don't believe that our problems are as aggravated as sometimes the magazines and newspapers make out.
There have been reports and indications from some sources that tension in Harlem is increasing in recent months.
I would not agree with that. Having been here myself in the days when tension was very high, in the days of the Ethiopian-Italian War, for example, in the days of the picketing of the 125th Street shops because Negroes couldn't work or didn't work as clerks in shops even in their own neighborhood, I would say that there's nowhere near such tension as there was then. Then you had the feeling that there might be a race riot, and there was race riots, as you know. Today, I don't feel that myself in Harlem at all. I do feel in Harlem a very deep interest in all of the things that concern the Negro people, a deep interest in Little Rock, for example, a deep sense of shock when Mac Parker is lynched. But I don't feel an intense racial bitterness, shall I say, such as one might have felt here 20 years ago. I myself do not find Harlem an unpleasant community in any basic sense. You walk down 7th Avenue, there are trees down the middle of the street, there are brightly lighted shops and stores and bars and cabarets, and there are people who look happy and who seem happy, and in my opinion, Harlem is basically a joyous community in spite of all its problems, and it's a community that a great many Harlemites love very much, and the fact that sometimes we make a great deal of noise about our problems, well, we hope that they will be remedied, and some of us think that by making a lot of noise about them, it'll make other people think about them, and maybe the ugly aspects of Harlem will gradually begin to disappear, as some of them are.
One question about police activity. What is your feeling when extra police, reinforcements are sent into Harlem?
Well, sometimes we feel that there seems to be a kind of police invasion of Harlem, in that you see on almost every corner at times 2 or 3 policemen, and many of them are white. Now, I don't believe that we have any right to have any feeling against the white police, because they are part of the police department of the city of New York, as are the Negro police. But unfortunately, Harlem being a 99% black community, when on every corner you see just white police, sometimes the residents sort of feel like, well, we are occupied, you know? And this, I don't think, is the fault of the police department at all, because I thoroughly agree with Kennedy's statement that the police department has to be integrated, that there should be integrated police in Harlem as in other communities of New York. And it's just, unfortunately, the fact that Harlem is a ghetto community, so sometimes this black-white thing reacts adversely for everyone.
Is there open resentment at any times against white policemen?
Well, only in times of tension, I think. Again, to go back to the Ethiopian War, or I think for a time when there was so much tension in Little Rock, it seemed that there was an increase of police here in Harlem, as if they were afraid something was going to happen here, you see. And most of the police sent here seem to have been white, and many of them seem to have been quite young fellows who, I must say, looked a little bit afraid.
There have been certain movements in recent months, again, that perhaps they can't be classified under tension, but let's indicate the movements such as the Buy Black campaign and the proposed picketing of liquor stores in Harlem in order to persuade dealers to deal only with Negro wholesale salesmen. Is this an indication of another feeling, a heightening of the desire to get out, to spread out, to integrate?
No, I would say that this is simply an extension of the same feeling that caused the Negro peoples of Harlem to picket shops back in the 20s, in which they couldn't work. I think the basic problems of Harlem, of course, are economic, and the fact that the Negro people cannot get jobs as easily as people who are white all over New York. And in a sense, that is true in Harlem. So much of the business in Harlem is owned by people who don't live here. You see them during the week. You don't see them on Sunday at all. They're just not here. They've gone home to their nice houses up in the country somewhere, or out on Long Island, you see. The same thing is true of the housing situation. Much of the housing in Harlem is not owned by Harlemites at all. Where it is, you usually find the house well kept when it's a privately owned house. But much of the housing is owned by absentee landlords or by banks or mortgage associations, and they just simply take the rent, let the house run down, and enjoy the fruits of the income in other communities, very little of the money coming back to Harlem. And so, of course, Harlem's feeling is that what we spend here in Harlem, why can we not also profit by some of that money coming back to us?
Since there are so many white owners of businesses and apartment houses, tenement houses in Harlem, why is it that more Negroes have not gotten into the field?
Well, there are many reasons, of course, beginning with the fact that when the Negroes were freed from slavery, they were freed with nothing. So it's taken them a considerable little while to work up to any people with large sums of money to purchase houses or start businesses or own real estate. But when one does acquire enough money to perhaps go into business, if you are colored, you run into many problems that other people don't run into. For example, here in Harlem, for a long time, it was almost impossible for a Negro to rent ground floor space on 125th Street. All of the shops, from river to river on 125th Street, owned by whites, run by whites, managed by whites. Then, if a Negro were able to rent space, always the problems of loans. They're not as easy for us to get as other people. Loans to start your business, to get your stock. And then the problems of insurance. It's incredible how many insurance problems there are for Negroes and for Harlem. A great many types of insurance seemingly just cannot be gotten in Harlem if you're colored.
The street signs say 125th Street. 25th Street is what they often call it up here. The world begins at 110. I would rather be a lamppost on 25th Street than a king in Alabama. Old Harlem saying. Still, a man isn't always free in his own backyard. Any man in his 40s can remember when Negroes had to sit in the balcony at the Apollo Theater. Not any longer. He can remember when there were no Negro clerks in the stores right here on the Negro Main Street. There are plenty now. When Negroes just weren't served in some of these restaurants. There's a law against that now. But the color line is far from gone. There is one restaurant up here that represents an important new breach in the color line. It is just about to open with a blast of neighborhood fanfare. CBS newsman Richard Gibson asked its owners what the excitement was all about. The owners, Frederick Weaver, Gertrude Brown, and Lloyd Von Blaine.
Mr. Blaine, how do you explain your success in getting a lease after so many Negroes failed?
Well, Dick, by hard negotiation and frankness, we told the landlord that we felt that he didn't want to rent us because we were Negroes. And after about several days of discussion, we brought up to him certain incidents that were happening in Harlem, where we felt that we should be given an opportunity to express our talents, regardless of our race, creed, or color, that we had the ability and financial ability and ability to produce, and we wanted to compete with the rest of the merchants on this block, or any block that we might be in, that we shouldn't be denied that particular right. We brought certain documents to him to show him that we were qualified.
Do you feel that the landlords, that many landlords thought or think that Negroes just aren't qualified, that they don't know how to operate efficient businesses?
That was definitely his indication when we discussed it with him about 4 or 5 days. And we even offered him a binder the first day. And it was unusual for a landlord to not accept a binder when you advertise a store for rent. And he refused the binder. So We brought my other association, Mr. Weaver and Miss Brown here. And what was your impression, Miss Brown?
Well, that was certainly my impression, Vaughn. And I think, too, that we have sort of set a precedent on West 125th Street. And there are now 2 other vacant stores, and I'm sure, using the same kind of tactics we use, that they would be able to rent them.
All right, Mr. Weaver?
Well, I think that's about correct. They use various methods to keep us off. They don't tell you that they don't want to rent the Negroes. They usually make their rent so prohibitive that you can't afford to rent. For example, we are paying here for this spot that you can see the same amount of rent that the former tenant was paying for this floor and the floor above. We are paying that same amount just for this one spot. And then after the landlord decided that he was going to rent to us, he changed his mind over the weekend after he had signed the binder with us. And in his lawyer's office, he wanted to break off the lease. He didn't want to rent for 10 years because he thought money would be made, and he had undersold the lease hold that he had agreed to rent his property to us for. But all up and down the street, as Ms. Brown was saying, there are 3 vacant stores in this block now. This store here was vacant 9 months, waiting for some chain store, somebody who lives out of the community to come into it. And what we told the landlord was that the sentiment and the temper of this community is such today that we will not tolerate out of the community business people coming into 125th Street, making the money, when there are people in the community with the same economic resources, the same ability to operate the business successfully, and they're going to give their preference to someone who does not live in the community to come in. And I think through that type of brainwashing, if you want to call it that, we were able to whip him down and let him know that anyone coming out of the community, in preference to us, when we had the first choice on the place, we were the first to approach him by the restaurant, would not be able to operate that business successfully. And I think I speak for the community in that regard.
Do you think this had anything to do with the Buy Black movement? Do you feel that at least influenced?
I don't think Buy Black had anything to do with it. We're not here to run a black restaurant, a white restaurant, or any other color restaurant. We are here to make money like any legitimate businessman wants to make. If Howard Johnson wants to make it or use a name, we want to make it too if we have the resources and the know-how. It's not associated with any race or any cult or any type of thing like that. It's the fact that people who live in Harlem have been economically repressed. We cannot expand because we can't get the property in which to rent. And if we can't get the place in which to rent, we can't make money.
You know, Fred, there are a lot of our personal friends who know us very well.
That's right.
Still do not believe that we have negotiated a lease.
That's true.
On the storefront property on 125th Street, and a lot of times they ask us if we are in the RPs in the back.
Well, just yesterday, one of my good friends who's a newspaper man wanted to know who our 4th partner was. He still believes that there must be some person who is not Negro behind us, that we don't have the money or that we were not able to by ourselves successfully negotiate a lease on 125th Street. They don't believe it.
That gives you an idea, Dick, of how impossible it has been for Negroes to rent on West 125th Street.
Well, you just have to walk up and down this street and look at any storefront from Lenox to 8th Avenue and find a Negro who is leasing property in his own right.
Oh, you're operating the business.
Yeah, this is the very heart of Harlem, the business center of Harlem. But I understand, Mr. Blaine, that you once operated the same type of business, a restaurant, here in New York, but not in Harlem, in a predominantly white neighborhood. Is that correct?
It was in Greenwich Village. And the peculiar thing about it was that we spent several days looking for location. Of course, Greenwich Village is a tight spot for a storefront, vacant storefront. When we did finally find one, we walked in the place. The landlord was there, my associate and I, and he knew we were colored. And he said, "You want to rent the place?" He said, "Sure." I told him what the rent was. We gave him on the spot a retainer, a binder. The next day went back and signed a lease without any problem whatsoever.
In other words, you had no discrimination outside of Harlem.
There's no discrimination in leasing and no discrimination in taxing.
But paradoxically enough, Harlem, the Negro community of New York City, the largest Negro community, is one where you find the greatest amount of discrimination against Negroes.
Right in this area. Right in here.
Most Harlem business is small business, and lots of it is conducted right out on the street. The icy man, the uptown version of the good humor. For a nickel or a dime, you get a scoop of shaved ice and a spray of syrup. 12 delicious colors and one flavor, sweet. And then there's the watermelon man. Nowadays it's 60 cents for an armload. Another familiar street scene, the checker players. But most prevalent of all on every Harlem street are the kids, the school kids. And the scars on the school buildings are just the kind of attrition that sometimes occurs between terms and during terms. Harlem also has new schools, buildings in perfectly good shape. Good or bad, it's not the school buildings that parents are so upset about, it's the quality of education. Community support is being mobilized on behalf of permissive zoning, the right to send your child to a school outside the neighborhood. Parents' groups meet regularly to discuss school problems. And in a beat-up meeting hall the other day, they stayed after to give us their views on this issue and others. A mother of 9, critical of schools. She was asked what she thought the trouble was.
A great deal of the fault is teachers. For the simple reason that teachers, if they had a better attitude toward our Harlem children, if they had a more broad-minded attitude that all children are able to learn as they started out, and given a good curriculum, they would be better equipped.
Do you say that the attitude of the teachers, of some of the teachers, is not broad-minded?
Some of the teachers. Attitude has a great deal to do with it.
Well, you speak, of course, to your children about their school problems practically every day.
Definitely.
What do they think, what do they tell you about it? Do they have any resentments? Do they feel that there's something that they want?
Well, children always want something. Children go to school very eager to learn. And I find it regrettable that they're so readily stymied. They start out on the same by comparison to other communities, but quickly you find that they're behind in so many areas. And it certainly isn't the child's fault. And knowing from my own children, we stress education. We want to see our children educated. We want to see them get ahead. And it's regrettable to find that I know of my own children who have the ability to learn have found it very difficult to bridge the ills in the school.
Another parent and another question. Life in New York as a whole and the problem of discrimination.
Well, it's very hard to say. I haven't been living in Harlem for about 4 years. Before I lived in Brooklyn. And then there are certain places that when we do go in different restaurants or different places that you are the last one that they wait on, and other people can come in and they are wait on right then. And so, but I guess we still find that as down south as well as we do here in New York.
Does it make you angry?
Well, at times it does. But a lot of times if you know that if you go in there it's trouble, it depends, you know. Sometimes we say, well, I am an American and I have a right to go into that place. So you go in, and sometimes you are treated as if you're not even there. And then there are some restaurants that I can say that are very pleasant for anyone that comes in.
Well, I feel that while the school situation is about the most important, I feel that much could be done as far as housing in our area, overcrowding, much higher rents paid than other people, poor facilities. And getting away from housing, I feel that our hospital situation is another area that much could be done. We have a new building that has been sitting there at 136th Street and Fifth Avenue for some 20 months, long overdue. And I imagine because of the political situation, perhaps that may have been a factor in the fact that it's just beginning to be opened this week. There are other areas as far as economics. They say that we're economically low, culturally deprived, which is all a lot of nonsense, which they very well themselves know, those people that give the excuse. But we can't help but be economically deprived when the merchants come into the area and sell us inferior food, inferior clothing, and any other commodity you could possibly name at a much higher price than in other areas. Then you could go into politics. I think that perhaps if more political patronage were paid to the citizens of Harlem, who they very well depend greatly upon for votes, some of these ills could be corrected, because we would have our own interested people that come from the Harlem area, that live and that have been born more or less from the Harlem area, to personally look after some of these inadequacies.
Finally, a teacher looks at the school situation from a Harlem viewpoint.
I look at it with mixed feelings. On one hand, I see a city such as New York, which has the finest pronouncements of education that you'll find in the country. That goes for integration as well as ideals. On the other hand, I see in Harlem, in Marcigny where I teach, in the Bedford-Stuyvesant areas, and in several other enclaves, standards which I would term educational anemia. I think that the quality of education in these schools are such that they're not preparing youth for the job that we have to do in the world tomorrow. I can cite my own example. I teach at PS2 in the Bronx. I've been there for 12 years. Over those 12 years, we've had perhaps all of our staff to leave, and then leave again, and then leave again. I've seen 3 principals. When I return to school in September, there'll be no principal, and nor will there be one or any of the 3 assistant principals that are attached to my school. I think that these enclaves or these segregated ghettos are the basic reason why we have this turnover of teachers. I feel that teachers are not the most important thing, of course, in this whole picture, but the children. As victims of this segregated community, they live in a situation in which health, housing, and schools are below the standards for any American citizen. I think that the curriculum in these schools is such that the Board of Education must take direct action. But this does not require money at all. It should certainly take steps to see that experienced teachers and experienced supervisors are provided so that these children will have equal opportunity with the rest of the children in New York City.
There is no typical Harlem house or Harlem street or Harlem's voice. It's a big neighborhood with all kinds of individual differences. But what we have seen and heard is representative of a neighborhood mood, a local spirit. That mood is restless, even angry, about housing. The bulldozers just can't seem to keep up with the decay. About economic conditions. Well, job opportunities for Negroes are greater than ever before, but still, as they say, the Negro is the last to be hired and the first to be fired. And Harlem businessmen complain about discriminatory practices right here on their own home ground. And there are complaints, too, about hospitals, about schools, about sanitation. In city services, Harlem feels it's being shortchanged. The police question, which started the current anxiety, is not a critical one, but it is significant because it points up most painfully the Negro's lack of status, as a force in the affairs of the city. What hurts most is that the police are the power up here, the police and not the politicians. You keep hearing that time and again. And the police are run by whites, just as the city is run by whites. Now, what Harlem wants is political leadership to replace that police leadership. That means local men, Negroes in high city positions, men who can translate the needs of Harlem into action for Harlem. The trouble in Harlem, then, is primarily a civic and not a racial one. But the extremists are on the street corners and in the meeting halls, trying to whip this civic issue into a racial one. And as long as Harlem remains physically a racial ghetto, there's a standing invitation to more trouble here in New York. This is Bill Leonard. Good evening.
Presentation of the WCBS-TV Public Affairs Department.